Well, this may be our crew here. Other folks may join, but we'll go ahead and get rolling so we have enough time for everything.
Right.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jackson Martin. I think some of the folks here already know me, but for those of you who do not, I'm an associate professor of sculpture here at UNC Asheville. I'm also the chair of our Department of Art and Art History. I'd like to start off by giving special thanks to S. Tucker Cook for his contributions to our Endowed Artist and Scholar Fund, without which these types of artist lectures would not be possible. And also just a reminder to make sure your microphone is off. It looks like everybody's is. We'll have a question and answer Q&A at the end, at which time, of course, you can turn your microphone and camera on. But if you wouldn't mind, while Chrissy's speaking, just leave your microphone off, please. Um, yeah, so very pleased to welcome Christina P. Day, at least virtually, today. Day's art practice recontextualizes roles related to material lifespan: designer, fabricator, owner, maintainer. Her improvisational building language stems from textile design strategy and is focused on the conversation of material as context. Her work takes form in architectural installation, surfacing methods, textile pattern logic, and match finding. Day is a full-time faculty member of the Fiber Department at Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore, where her teachings focus on cloth production methods and experimental fashion. Recent exhibitions on research and material history have been completed at Automat in Philadelphia, Fleischer Art Memorial, also in Philadelphia, Commonweal Gallery, Hagley Museum and Library in Wilmington, and Kirkcaldy Museum in Scotland. She maintains her home and studio in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So please join me in welcoming Christina P. Day.
Thank you so much, Jackson, for this invite to speak to this community at UNC Asheville. This is really such a pleasure. I'm operating in the role of the chair of my department right now in the fiber department at MICA, and I'm often facilitating these kinds of conversations for classes for other artists. So it's really nice to be invited back to the classroom, to your community, to be able to speak about my artwork. I have a lot of slides that I'm going to show in a short period of time. So stay with me. I'm going to keep a timer going so I know where I'm at in this conversation. Uh, I know the audience that I'm speaking to is, as I gather, like largely sculpture majors, but also art majors in your community. And the trajectory of my talk is going to cover not only my art practice, but where my teaching practice is related to it and how I even came to making this work. Because I think I currently work with seniors in thesis who are moving through their last year of art school. And it's always interesting to listen to people talk about how they got to where they did, what were they doing in undergrad, and what followed. How did they find their way? That's always the big mystery for artists. So I've included some pictures of the department because I think it's important to talk about the microfiber department and its relationship to how my art practice functions in those classes and like how I speak as an artist and both a teacher in that space. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get started. And even though we did this for 1 year, hopefully I still do this right. It's like you can forget how to do this very easily. Okay, so I just need a confirmation that in fact you can see this screen. We're good. Okay, I'm also going to shut off my video. So my little head is going to go away, although you might still see my still. Um, and we're going to begin. So I named this talk Interstitials for a reason, and it has to do with the fact that I spend a lot of time thinking about the space in between things. I think about space as a form of color, time as a form of color. I think about space as a construction in between things to focus on. And a lot of the matter that I've picked up along the years that my artwork is based off of and on and about has to do with missing information and margins. So what you're looking at here are two slides that I found in a junkyard. This is not of a space that I know. It's a space that I think about often, the division of this and the missing information that's shared between both. I think about place as moment, place as person, object as eulogy, surface as surrogate. I also love to go to flea markets. I think of flea markets as a living archive. I really love studying other people's version of what I call fabulous. I think it's important to celebrate other people's sense of intense taste. Also, especially when it might be relatively questionable, I love enthusiasm for fashion and also style, regardless of whether it's in or out. These pins I found in a special place called the Jake's Flea Market, which is in Bartow, Pennsylvania, in 2018. I have a lot of objects that I collect and have collected over time that I have what would I would regard as like a double take of paying attention. I think of flea markets and antique shops as being places where I have double take moments of other people's objects. This is a special object that I found that's a World's Fair brass souvenir envelope that was actually, it opens like a box and a letter could be put inside. And I suppose in 1939, when this fair happened, you could have your name literally engraved or the name of the person it was headed to engraved on the top. As you can see, this was actually used through the mail, which is pretty amazing. I'm obsessed with objects that have like two functions or like two different agendas. This is another object that really got my attention. It's a Ford car advertisement audio postcard, which is another object that was intended to be sent through the mail. You can actually put this on a record player and play it, and what you can hear is an audio jingle from probably like the mid 1920s of an auto body a car salesman trying to sell his cars to the audience, and it's this really amazing object that literally functions in two different ways at once. This was also found at Renninger's in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I should also add that I'm calling in from Philadelphia today. This is the place that I've lived since I came to Philadelphia to go to undergrad at the University of the Arts. Coming to Philadelphia has changed my life in a lot of ways, and it's continually a source of inspiration for the type of work I make. Uh, Another object that I found giving me a double take moment was this artificial leg patent model, which was found at the Hagley Museum and Library in Wilmington, Delaware. Um, the Hagley Museum and Library, which is something I'll swing back to in a bit, is a really important place for patent models to hold a home. It's on the Northeast Corridor. It's one of the only places that has about 5,000 patent models in it, which are basically miniaturized objects that explain or basically claim the ownership of the design for an inventor or somebody who a designer. And at a particular moment in time in the late 1800s, it was actually required for inventors to create models that were miniaturized to basically back up the ownership of their idea in like regular in design space. So if somebody went to a court and or basically tried to use this person's uh, work in a context where they were claiming it was theirs, this person could appear in court with this object and say, no, that's my patent model. You can't have that. You can't have this idea. So this particular museum is a really special museum for a lot of reasons because it holds this unbelievable archive of miniaturized objects that have one function to explain. I'm taken really with objects that have two lives, you know, a positive and a negative. This is a random newspaper print plate that I found at the Cabin Fever Expo in Lebanon, Pennsylvania in 2023. This is a really special expo that exists that is all about physics and moving objects. And I highly recommend you look this up if you can. It's one of the stranger expos I've ever attended in Pennsylvania. Trickle down fashion is of great interest to me. I also at flea markets really love other people's sense of severe style. This is a shoulder brooch that is actually a Cartier knockoff, which trickles all the way back to like the 1920s for the original design that this was based off of. You'll find these in flea markets all the time, and they have the emerald eyes. What I found intense about this is that it's a shoulder brooch, which is also something I've never seen before. So at the Jake's Flea Market again, this is Bartow, Pennsylvania, 2018. Severity in economics. I love paying attention to design like this and where it shows up in really low stakes environments. Both CBS and QVC share a lot in common. Celebrating taste, the intensity of both of these things. I can't explain how I found these booths on the right, but on the left, this is the Shady Maple gift shop of East Earl, Pennsylvania, which is one of the seven wonders of Pennsylvania. It's a smorgasbord dining hall that has this very intense gift shop in the basement. It's one of my favorite places in Pennsylvania because of being able to find things like this. I'm fascinated by the fact that some designer thought that this was worthy of putting on a shirt and that multiples of them are for sale inside this shop. I also am taken with paying attention to textiles and how they're made in kind of low stakes situations. My background, I've been studying textiles since my undergrad years at UArts, but it's taken me through a lot of things, which you'll see further along in this presentation, of paying attention to materiality and where it shows up in fashion, but also in everyday life. Because I'm somebody who looks really closely at how things are made, and I study this and talk about it in my classrooms, I'm often looking really closely at construction. And what I realized in looking at this random pair of jeans from a PacSun store inside the mall that I was at with my niece a couple of months ago, I realized that what I was actually looking at with this pair of jeans was a photograph of denim on top of denim. That's not a real distress line that you're looking at there. It's actually a photograph of a distressing technique that has been sublimation printed on top of the denim. So paying attention to the details sometimes pulls up some interesting things about mimicry and like faux design. I'm really obsessed with faux design. Um, Other people's versions of good. I've been paying attention to this for a while. This blew my mind in this cab ride that I had, that the cab driver had bothered to replace the door click on and off with a die that had little fake rhinestones in it. I love this. I also love found photography. I have been obsessed with family photos that I have no personal connection to for a long time. I love the style that's coming across in this, the sense of occasion that's coming through, and also the warmth in the photograph, because what this photograph is communicating is that the person who took this photo knows them. And I think that that's really important to pay attention to, especially for me in relation to my artwork. I think about photography as being a sight line that's hardened between people that know each other. And it's a real thing. It's a moment captured in time of two people looking at each other, or in this case, three people looking at each other. This is one of my other favorite photographs ever. I found this in Michigan in one of our favorite flea markets when I attended grad school at the Cranbrook Academy of Art. I do not know this little girl, but after looking at this picture for a long, long period of time, I've come to realize that what's going on in this photo is that she's in fact wearing probably her grandmother's wig. Okay, something that happened more recently that's also left me thinking about other people's things in relation to my work has to do with a tour that I took through the Pennsylvania Fiber Shed group in Philadelphia, which was actually at a sorting facility of a Goodwill in South Jersey. This is kind of the last stop of where materials will go before the last stop of them trying to be sold before they're literally shipped off to another country to be used for another reason. And at this point, when you see them in these bins that are these sort of roll around gurneys that they're on, on the right, what you're looking at are these tables that roll out into the space every 2 to 3 hours. And there's people that come through and pick anything it's a mixed jumble of anything. There's no organization to this. And if you find yourself in this type of situation, you're actually buying material by the ounce and by the pound instead of buying it by the item because there's so much volume of trying to catch something before it ends in the landfill that it's handled in this sort of last ditch effort to find another home for them before they're completely eliminated. These large bales that you see on the left are like daily shipments that are supposed to go out onto, into shipping containers and then sent across the world to other countries to be used in another way, which are also purchasing these materials at cost by the ounce and by the pound. One of my favorite parts about visiting this facility was watching how the staff members chose things that they thought were valuable and that they wanted to keep. I think it's really the concept of like it's only worth as much as you like it is, or it hits hard for me in a lot of ways because I think about other people's versions of good all the time and like what it means for somebody to claim style as their own and to believe in it and to take care of it over time. I really appreciate other people's work and other people's opinions about that. And if they think it's good, I agree. And so, like going into this space where everything's moving by very quickly was another moment where the people who work there every day and see all this material go by are, in fact, having what I would call a double take, which is what I was talking about before. Like paying attention to the double take is a big part of art practices and also staying on your content in this space. It was also pretty amazing to me. There was a jewelry specialist whose only job was to capture the jewelry as it goes by in this jumble. And you can imagine the speed at which these bins are passing through and things are getting dumped and all of that. The fact that there's somebody raking through all of that to find the special jewelry that needs to be then weighed and measured and determined what kind of metal it is, and then it might be priced at a different point and sold for more benefit to Goodwill. Again, what you see here are several examples of the Cartier knockoffs. So this was like what I started off with towards the beginning. What I had found at Jake's flea market is now showing up everywhere in here. This blew my mind, and actually I stopped to talk to the jeweler, the person who was measuring all of the jewelry, and I said, do you know the origin of this story? Because those objects of the animals with the emerald eyes go all the way back to the 1920s. We had a really interesting conversation about this. I just love that the idea of like trickle down fashion and also the sort of democratic like availability of trickle down fashion. That's something that starts in this really inaccessible, expensive space, like where Cartier would have begun, is now showing up at a sorting facility in Goodwill and is sold by the ounce. And it's still something worth saving. That's the thing at the end of the day. I'm interested in craft production and failure. This is a terribly executed cake. Also, time and adjustment. These are little sketches that I've made over the years that have to do with things that happen when you're on residency. I've been fortunate to attend a bunch of residencies that have given me the time and space to flip my own script and also get lost in my work. And I'm a big puzzler. You'll see this later in my work, how this might relate to what's going on. But I was thinking about moves that are subtle and deliberate and also exact, but like not to the goal of the object. I am a graduate at the University of the Arts, which now, rest in peace, is closed. I My experience at UArts really formed my understanding of materiality and sample making. I was a crafts major in that department, which meant that I was concentrating in fiber an area of study, but really I was exposed to all five areas of craft while I was in that department. I happened to be there in what I would regard like a golden age of that department. The faculty had a major imprint on the students. The type of student that was coming to the school at that time also had a kind of energy of experimentation and playing with material, understanding how to become like a fluent in a particular way of working. And when I found the fiber department, I thought I was actually going to go for jewelry and metals because of the relationship and the exposure that I was lucky to have to that as a teenager. But when I found the fiber department and saw the looms and the tooling that followed that and the sort of trade inside the artwork practice, that's when I found myself smitten with the field. I've taught in relation to fiber for many years since, and I've also found myself in foundation style classes where, we are figuring out how to suspend disbelief by making objects out of materials that are everyday materials that are in front of us. So what you're looking at here was actually my version of a project that I gave to students, where I was asking them to find an everyday object, pattern it out of paper, and then remake it out of oak tag. So these are old office folders actually from UArts that came from the administrative offices, and everybody made these objects they were like ghostly objects made out of oak tag. The funny or ironic part about this picture is that those are the keys that I had for over 10 years to get in and out of the office in the department that I worked in. As part of the demo one day when I just decided to do the project myself, I made myself a set of keys that were an exact copy of that because it was a patterned object. The thing that I find haunting about this object now is that now I actually have keys to a space that doesn't exist anymore. Coming from the crafts department at UArts really started what I would call like a sample making logic in my life. This is something that has continued to drive all of the surfaces that I work in and the way that I deal with edges in my work, like how I end something. Textiles have a special relationship to how they end. It's one of our great conceptual problems for the field, is literally how to terminate something that is hardwired to repeat. If we're talking about textile pattern or the way that connections need to be made through a constructed form, we're always talking about ongoing making, ongoing building. And I've found myself to be in dialogue with that as a conceptual problem for many years, and I've encountered it a lot of different ways. For a period of time, actually through COVID, when we needed to move online, I started doing these intense beading samples. So I'm bringing this up in relation to UArts because my sensibility of making something generating a surface without knowing exactly what it's for yet is actually a very important practice to me. It's important to generate textures to me, to generate surfaces before I know what they're for, because I'm building a library of texture And that approach is becoming a metaphor that I can use for other things. Meaning that I'll find fabric that has a certain type of aesthetic to it, and then I'll deeply quilt into the drawing or the photograph of it to sort of emphasize or emboss already there. I have this preoccupation with kind of underlining other people's work because this is somebody else's basically collage on cloth. And here I am like driving over the top of it and intensifying it. I actually have this as a large piece of yardage that I intend to use as the lining for the inside of a jacket that I intend to make one day. Using surface color work as a guide for buildup. The interesting thing about working in the microfiber department is that I encounter all kinds of students that are headed in different directions. A lot of things stem off of studying textiles, one of which is to go into material research and development for major product lines. I was lucky enough many years ago to have one student move on to work for Nike right after I worked with them. I was not full time at the time, but I had a big imprint on this particular student. They took every class they could with me. And when they got this job at Nike, they turned around and said, I need to start sending you material. We need to do an exchange. And so this turned into this back and forth with fabric through the mail, where I was working with a former student of mine to generate textures out of whatever was coming through. This was actually a piece of originally when it was flat before I did this sort of abalone treatment to it. This was a piece of foiled leather that was intended for usage on like Air Force One Nike sneakers. To date, I still see this metallic leather show up in Nike's shoes, which is kind of amazing. When someone goes into that type of job where they're generating textures in that context for that type of company, it goes into a library that then any designer has access to. So this was a kind of a special exchange of like material that's used in a different context that I was working out what I was making sense of it with. And to me, it seemed like a metaphor for abalone, which was to cut it into these shapes and to follow the foil line sort of spread that was happening in the way the colors had fallen. Sample logic is something that I work through where I work with materials that sometimes don't make sense together, but I'm trying to pay attention again to like where I'm having the double take. This is a piece of vintage wallpaper that I also found in the trash that I have been separating color separations and then putting them back together again. And in this case, I was also mixing it with found candlesticks that were also found in the trash. And I realized when I lifted the sort of embedded piece of wallpaper up to the light, I had these glows, this like glowing effect that was happening through the material. I still don't know what this sample is for, but I think it's important, again, to stay with things that you don't understand because they might become important later. My life in color and my relationship to color that I was bringing up before started at an early point in my undergrad life. When I was a sophomore over my time there, I took on an internship at a special company in New York City called Dynamics. The person who owns this company is Raylene Marasco, and she was a graduate of the same program that I came from. She opened her own dye studio in Hoboken first and then New York second, and went on to do all of this incredible textile work for runway, theater, dance, puppetry, film, commercial, all kinds of things for people that needed a custom color done. And I ended up with this internship, and then it spread into this sort of relationship that spread over about 6 years of returning back because I was that person that could remember the chemistry. I was careful with other people's things. I could be trusted with a deadline. And I would also stay late. If I needed to get it done, I stayed late. And that was something that she really needed at the time. And therefore, I ended up on these projects that were really kind of special and rather intense. So what you're looking at here on the left is a series of swatches that were collected. These are usually the wrong colors that I was holding on to, like all the misfires. There'd be a sample and then an accepted result. You'd be color matching to a point with dye on a particular type of fiber to get a color to work. And this was all kinds of fabrics that we would work on. We did everything from the leggings for the Radio City Music Hall Rockettes to costumes that were headed into Broadway shows like Rent. All kinds of things happened at that job, which were always, due yesterday. It all happens at a speed that's very quick. Betsy Johnson had dropped off these garments that were already tailored with this sort of inspiration garment that she wanted others based on. And basically, she let us go to town by interpreting one garment onto another. And a year later, when I found myself flipping through W Magazine, which was one of my favorite publications at the time to look at to sort of track how the fashion industry was handling these things, I found the dress that I had actually dyed walking on the runway. So that on the right there is the result of the work that came from that exchange, which, like it's not my name that's on this, but that's the thing about fashion is that there are hundreds of people involved with the making of these kinds of things. And it kind of gave me an early relationship to production that I've grown to really think about and talk about in my classrooms. Having an art reaction to learning a trade technique, as it goes with the type of work that comes out of a crafts department at UArts, you're playing with material until you understand what you're trying to say. And I graduated from that program and then had this really strong reaction to American accessibility and American sort of luxury in day-to-day life. The Saran Wrap company, the Reynolds Wrap Saran Wrap company at the time, had an Easter basket palette of colors of plastic wrap that were available. I still don't understand why these products even existed at the time because they were really kind of meant to wrap like an Easter basket in like a pale shade of pink or whatever. And so I started collecting the palette of them because I was thinking like a dyer, but also building like an artist. And I ended up making this sort of bizarre collection of clothes that were based off of this color book that I made. So again, this is like what happens when you learn a trade technique, but you kind of can't take your art goggles off. So I started working with these layerings of color to create a sort of air quotes dye notebook of plastic wrap. None of this is dyed. This is all layered because clear becomes something solid the more you layer it. I was surprised that I was able to get maroon out of this. That's still a mystery to me. Those are my formulas, by the way, of like what it took to get the color. This led to projects that had these sort of intense hand cut repeat patterns, illusions of repeat pattern that were realigned, hand cut out of the yardage that I made of the color, realigned over a light box to make it look like a print, and then tailored into a garment that was actually based off of a vintage shape. This then led to a series of photographs that made these garments look very real in like a day-to-day context. This is a transition point from like after undergrad to grad where I was starting to make things look real, but I didn't really understand why. And the funny part about this work is that as I was working this way, I remember being on one of my shoots and I kept asking the model to back up and to back up and to back up because the further away she got, the more real the dress looked. And I realized at a later point what I was looking to see happen was to ask the old artwork to leave so I could make the new work. So I'm going to skip over to how this shows up in my classroom now because I teach a special class at the Maryland Institute College of Art in the fiber department, which is known as surface resist dyeing. This is one of my signature classes in the department where I teach the skills that I learned on in production dyeing, actually in the classroom. So the students learn how to master color and how to really look closely at where colors go and how to really understand the color wheel in a very physical way. So this is a workshop moment where we're tracking color on the table and taking swatches to see not only how like pH will shift and with certain additives, but also how colors play against each other, whether when they're mixed in multiple ways. This is also a class where we do all kinds of screen printing techniques. This is known as a rainbow roll, where you drop pigment or dye directly on the table, and then you pull it straight across with a squeegee. The students learn how to do partner printing in this way because nobody can actually reach all the way across the table, so they have to learn how to pass a squeegee to another person. It's a cool way of getting a stripe of fabric, a stripe of like an ombre fade down onto a piece of fabric in this particular orientation. This is also a class where everything is a group build. We have color libraries that we work and that we work with that give the students like a full sense of the rainbow and to understand like how many variables that it takes to make colors complicated. This is also a place where production yardage happens. And this again is thinking about, the repeat pattern and how it works and how to make something twice, which is a classic also major problem that we have with textiles in the field of fiber. Making something once is totally acceptable, but if you're going to speak the language of textiles, part of the problem means that you have to make it a second time. Production lives in a different context also for me in this setting. I worked with a special class called the Multimedia Event, which ends in a live fashion show at the end of the year. And the students who are in the experimental fashion minor at the school generate collections that are created over the course of a year. And then they collaboratively work with two graphic designers and the studio lighting class of the photography department to make this production book that is then distributed at the live show. The way that this functions is that the students all have to learn each other's jobs. And this is a special experience that students have that's really quite formative for how they understand collaboration with others and where their roles are that are the strongest in that situation. the live show is really a situation that's really fun. This was one particular event that happened that was a wrestling event that was happened inside a ring that was staged in about 20 seconds. This had a live announcer to it, and the attending crowd got involved. There was a lot of heckling involved, which was hilarious. So I like to help students figure out their relationships to production in like every which way that I can. Soft sculpture and inflatables is another really amazing class where people figure out how to make forms in a sensitive way and then also to enlarge them or uh, shrink them. This is also a really fun class where we do group build work together. MICA is really an incredible place for a lot of reasons because it's an unpredictable art school, which is one of its greatest characteristics, actually, and one of the reasons why I still love working there. Back to my art practice and like how I'm thinking about construction and where this shows up in the classroom. I'm always thinking about twinning and doubles and duets and how things appear twice. I was talking about South Philadelphia before. It plays a major role in the aesthetics of my artwork and also how I think about material. I put this in here even though the Eagles lost their game last night. um, Philadelphia went through like a major thing when they won the Super Bowl. It's kind of hard to explain if you did not see it or experience it in person, but the reaction that the city had to that level of a win was really like something I've never seen before. And I've been living here since 1995. So to have witnessed this type of celebratory, anybody was talking to anybody about how this went was really something kind of profound. That is real on the right there. Like people had actually rolled a full pig roast onto the SEPTA Broad Street line to serve people on the way to the stadiums. That's actually real. On the left, I happened to be lucky to know somebody that was in attendance and on the production team of the recording of the Super Bowl who, was on the field and also like dealing with the playback things that happen when a major play is done. He's the one helping to stage the way that's played back through the TV. And at the end, when they won, he ran out to the field and scooped up a whole bunch of confetti and saved it. And I was lucky to get one of those small baggies of confetti. Now, this is relevant deeply to my art practice because I look at that little bag and I think of it as like a material charge. Where that was when it happened and what it means for those that understand and get it is actually really significant. Oh, it's not going to play. Okay, moving on. I had a little video of people walking down Broad Street, which is not going to play. That's too bad. I come from a neighborhood of glowing doorbells. This is an aesthetic in South Philly that I always think about. It's a signal that someone's home. I don't know if you've seen these things before, but it's of old aesthetic in our neighborhood, and it's something that I think about all the time. Uh, you know, the idea of like making something that seems like it's on, but not there. Projecting photographs into a space where they're not supposed to be to remember something. I think a lot about how materials that come from other people kind of hold a charge of them having been there, that the object itself somehow can remember what it's seen or where it's been. Constructing mirror images of things that feel like an open book or something that is folding in on itself. This is actually a fully wooden double window frame that has a seam line of wallpaper running down the center of it that breaks on a repeat. For a period of time after I followed my time at Cranbrook, I worked as a historic preservation carpenter in the city of Philadelphia, and I was repairing old pieces of wood trim that were probably made in like the late 1800s that would never be able to be made again. And in the process of doing that, we used this water safe epoxy that's actually more appropriate for boat repair. And it gets rock hard when it dries, and you can actually cut it on a table saw. It's kind of an amazing material. And I was part of the group that would repair these things and sort of bring the wood back to life to put them back in place for properties that were deemed, with historic value in the city of Philly. I found myself on that particular team at different sites that are still kind of haunting me. This is like one of those moments where like your work life might suddenly teach you something about what you're looking at. There I am on this team, on this scaffolding unit, working on the roof line of these two houses on a street that was a series of houses, a whole row of them, that were built by Frank Furness in the late 1800s. And we were repairing the downspout that wrapped around this house, which basically encouraged water to drop off the front in the most discreet way. It's not like they had literally a downspout as we know it, in a visible spot going down the front. Everything was covered with this ornamental metalwork. So what it was when we got there was what it looked like on the right, and what it was when we left is what you're looking at on the left. But more importantly, what's important about this picture to me are two things. First, the graininess of this photograph is a mark of time of the type of camera and the type of phone that I had on me at the time, which is now feeling quite dated. So that's an interesting moment that the pixelation of the picture kind of marks where I was in time then, but also physically where I'm standing is not a place where anyone stands. This scaffolding unit is now gone, and I'm standing in like a no man's space. Um, I think about that often about the fact that I was 3 stories up looking down on everyday life that was walking by, but that it's like an impossible view where I was standing. I was also standing in a spot where I was standing right where the person who made this to begin with was the first time it was put there. So in thinking about architecture and replacement, and also the, the history timeline that you find yourself on as a builder, that has continued to haunt me a little bit. Mirrors and twinning. And in response to that experience of being there, that street that those buildings were on was in the process of getting raised by Temple University to be turned into dormitories for the school. And by nature of the fact that these second-story window banks were connected to one another, if you knocked down one house, you opened up the pocket to the next. And I had a strong response about this because as these tractors are sort of driving up and down 17th Street, knocking these things down, there's this gaping hole on the side of one of the houses, and you could literally see in to the construction of the house and like the twinning of space that was on either side. And so, of course, I, can't take the art goggles off, and I'm going to make a sculpture about this, which became an inside-out version of this window box that had a relationship to that space as the space and the object and the architecture that was in between became the focus. I like to think about objects being able to see things again. This is a Polaroid camera that has a divided light window trim built right over the top of the eyepiece. Locking an object in space by overlaying wallpaper details that have been deeply extracted only down to the design. I've been thinking a lot about objects that have like a hard sightline that are understood in 3D, but at a certain point, there's like a sweet spot where it aligns. And if you investigate enough, you'll realize that there's something very specific going on here. Thinking about textures of time, textures that you know from another time in a different context. This is basically a reenactment, a remake of a post that came from the first house that I owned with my husband, and it's wrapped in a textile that was made of, or was the couch that I spent my entire youth on. The couch no longer exists, but I have a tendency to collect textures that come from other places and then to use them in an out of context way. Thinking about timelines and projection of delay, looking through a window and remembering that you were there. Also hardening things into a place where they don't function anymore. These rotary phones, like, we're in a maybe product history moment right now where, most people don't recognize the feel of what this would have felt like to move it. But I like the idea of hardening things that once had like a rotation, forcing a sight line onto them. These things are really aligned. When you look at them overhead, they have a really specific sight line. This is another version of the same idea of a 45 case that's been painted sort of into being fused shut, again with details that align looking overhead. All of this is hand-cut wallpaper that from a vintage source that I have been tracking for a long period of time. I had a really intense experience at this residency in North Philly that is in the Tacony neighborhood. Back in 2015, I was a resident at Rare, which is an art residency, a material art residency, and the inside of Revolution Recovery, which is a sorting facility in Philadelphia. And it's the kind of place where 1-800 got junk trucks pull in, but it's also the kind of place where like a theater strike where they just needed to knock down the scene. They'll come in and dump all of the material into this place, and then it gets sorted and divided down by what it is to be recycled. We're lucky to have this residency in the city because it puts artists in this position where they have to act fast to pull material before you can really explain why you're having a reaction to it. So revival, rescue, and making have been showing up in my work in a lot of ways because of this. Rare sped up my reaction time, which is a very valuable thing as an artist to go through. This is one of my favorite objects that I found from that place. I often like to think about the fact that a mouth, especially teeth, like out of context like this in this sort of mechanical way, this is a perfect fit of person. Echoes of form, finding two things that are unlikely somehow coming from two different households out of time. This is a redesign of the same object from the same company, but also from two different households, probably at two different points in time. I found these within 4 days of each other, which was one of the agendas of my residency was to try to find things twice. I could not believe it when this happened. Finding personal sentiments inside of other people's things. This wallet had this, as it goes with people putting pictures of their family members in a wallet. Um, I came across this amazing thing which said, I do my thing and you do your thing. I'm not in this world to live up to your expectations, and you're not in this world to live up to mine. You are you and I am I. And if by chance we find each other, it's beautiful. If not, it can't be helped. Talk about like finding long-term love and missing information in the trash. Having reactions to, blowing a pattern past itself and mixing things. My sense of like what a match was under those circumstances really expanded. I wasn't just looking for the same object twice, I was looking for the same color twice. And then thinking about how things can be forced together to create a match, even when they're not supposed to be. So I think about the wall as a body and the sightline as memory. More work that I've done in relation to the wallpaper work that I was talking about. This is hand cut wallpaper design. It's the same pattern that you saw overlaid over the phone, but this time it's been painted into a wall. I painted it into the point of almost making it look kind of like a faux plaster relief that was pushing through. In the first house that I owned with my husband, it was a row home that was shared party walls on either side. And I was always thinking about that, about how we were connected on either side, the party walls, and the wall being like a pass-through space between neighbors. And walls are things that people sort of inadvertently paint themselves into. We always, put a fresh coat of paint up when we move into a new space. And inadvertently, we're kind of painting our own history right into the house. So I've just been thinking a lot over the years about my like how my relationship to putting something on a wall means that I'm psychically touching the history that's already there. Listening to things that have an internal monologue. My father served in the Vietnam War, and when he was there, he picked up this special set of Pioneer Mimi headphones, and this is the pair actually that he came back. It was like one of the only objects he returned home with, and I think often about how this, as a sort of anachronistic object, even from my youth, was in our family space and also, used all the time to listen to the radio. And even though it was this old set of headphones at the time, it represented a time for my father that that it predated me. So it was always curious to me about like these headphones and his experience there and this time that I'll never know. And I like to think about these headphones as like having an internal monologue in a way that's listening to itself, finding things and making like forcing repeats where they're not supposed to be. This is a peculiar object known as a set of opera glasses that they're pocket opera glasses where they collapse into a small object, kind of like a wallet that you can put in your pocket. And they're meant to be used for shows to be able to see, the opera singer at a distance. And for whatever reason, as I was, investigating these objects and looking through, the variety of them online, I do a lot of searching through eBay to find repeats of things. I was blown away by how many versions of these existed in competition. So I'm often thinking about objects and how design competition and the economics of that, like what's implied by competing products that are all really quite unique in their role. It took about 8 pairs of finding those to create this three-eyed object. So again, I'm thinking about objects that can sort of wake up and think for themselves. Some other objects that or pictures of things that I've collected along the way that gave me another double take moment where I needed to pause and think about what was going on. I was lucky enough to have a fellowship at the Winterthur Museum, Garden, and Library about 2 years ago, and I went in looking for work that was related to the history of linoleum as a material and ended up finding all kinds of other things. as it goes with research facilities, you'll go in looking for something and then you're going to find a whole lot more behind it. This was a Victorian craft at one point where people would take collections of leaves and whatnot, send them through this solution that would sort of pulverize all of the plant matter away. And what was left was the highway of veins that were in the materials. And they would make these beautiful X-ray forms that were sort of like a ghost of the original. I think about this often and like what this means in terms of materiality and death and echoes. Also, photography, looking at photography at that time had me thinking a lot about like what it took to get a photo in its earliest iteration. I came across this amazing book called The Tasteful Interlude, which is American Interiors Through the Camera's Eye in 1860 and 19 to, from 1860 to 1917. I just want to read this quick quote because I think this is interesting to think about in relation to this picture. Gaslighting was inadequate illumination for photographing rooms, so the photographers had to depend on light from open windows. Otherwise, he needed to take time exposures that could last for hours, and for that reason could never include people. During a time exposure, the photographer moved in and out of the picture, constantly adjusting window curtains and reflectors to attract maximum light. If he did not remain too long in one place, his image was lost. Most of the pictures here, which were taken prior to the turn of the century, were probably time exposures of anywhere from a matter of seconds to several hours, which also puts into perspective how long this person probably had to sit for this photo. That's hard for us to understand now because we do not have that kind of relationship to time in relation to photography. Thinking about surrogates, like listening for objects that can't speak anymore, that's other work that I've done in relation to found recordings of voices that I've also found in the trash. I'm really taken with other people talking to themselves, especially in a recorded circumstance, the kinds of things that would have shown up in like um, voicemail. I love listening to voicemail for this reason. Cutting objects and refitting them again, salvage that has a broken line because of where it came from, a fit line for where it was, and then the kind of work that I'm doing to add to the fit conversation. Echoes of form and people, taking the flat flooring of linoleum and its pattern, pulling all the background away, and then recontextualizing a collage that makes it feel like it's waking up again. This is also like an even more intense version of that. All of this is hand cut. It's hard to explain exactly how this landed where it did, but it's based off of a spray that's laid over a casket at a funeral. Some of the work that I've also elaborated on over the years has to do with architectural build sightline work. This was a particularly important show that I had in 2016 that was called, at the Q Art Foundation in New York City. And the show was called Stills and Composites. And it was based on the fact that my parents moved out of a home that they had been living in for about 35 years. And in the process of flipping everything upside down, as we do when we move, they came across this VHS recording of a old family party in Long Island that happened in the early 1980s that I actually remembered attending. And because nobody understood how to use the camera when they set it up in this room, the camera was getting bumped into by people who were dancing and just, busy enjoying the party, and nobody knew how to use the camera. So it would go on for about 10 minutes because somebody had bumped into it and it would be staring at the plate of ziti on somebody's table. And then somebody would come back, realize that it wasn't looking at the right thing, and then refocus on the people. And it's this kind of amazing fly on the wall uh, capture of all these people that are no longer here. And I made this piece that was a response to that, of thinking about sightlines and absent bodies and time. And it was the largest piece I've ever made, which was about 18 feet long, 9 feet wide, and about 8 feet tall. And it broke apart into about 80 pieces that were transported to New York and then put back together again. I built it in such a way that almost made it invisible in the room, which I know worked because I remember one person walking into the space, standing right in front of it and saying, "Where's the piece?" And I did that on purpose to make it feel invisible, as if the room itself was editing the work. The sight lines were meant for one person to look at a time. They were built about to be the width of a photograph when you were standing in front of the slits that looked into deeper space. It had a cinematic quality and a materiality of other people's history built into it, which had all been, pried out of other people's homes of renovation. I collect a lot of surfaces from other places and then rebuild them and recontextualize them in this type of way. Along with that party, the footage from that yielded a video. Well, in the video, the audio, there was a sort of incredibly crappy keyboard player that was probably paid to play songs to get people to dance at the party. And all of these audio headphones, which are the same Pioneer Mimi headphone that the other piece was about that I'd showed, uh, they were all reflecting on different songs that he sang, which were all really terribly executed at this party. It was all very human. You made people dance, and there was a lot of cheering going on in the background, even when you weren't looking at the video itself. I never felt it was appropriate to actually play the video back because it's a memory from our family, and it's that part was always meant to be private. I always feel like when I'm working with other people's things, I have a responsibility to their privacy, and I think about that often when I'm thinking about, the scars and the dings and the dents that are left by other people on their things. These are stills that informed the nature of the aesthetics of that piece. Because it's a video that's aged over time, everything is yellowed, which is something I think about often. That white plastic becomes yellow plastic over time. This is another piece that was in that show that was made out of vinyl. It was a seat cover that I had found at the junkyard that had actually ambered itself into this color, which as a colorist, I still kind of can't believe that the material itself made that type of color because I know how to dye that kind of color, but this is actually a capture of time, which is pretty amazing. What was interesting about working with this material is that I inadvertently realized that I was making a projection without realizing it. I didn't set out to do that, but again, paying attention to materiality and how it's behaving before you know what to do about it is a big thing that I'm paying attention to in my practice. My crafts background taught me to pay attention closely to that. Pattern repeats and breaks. Been thinking a lot about this tabletop collage that happened kind of quickly while I was at that residency at Rare, embedding things and slow work. This is a garment that I also found inside of a piece of luggage at the junkyard, and the label on the inside of it called, with the name of the company was called Youth Guild, which I think is amazing. This is actually kind of a knockoff of a Chanel suit. So thinking about design, trickle down fashion, and also um, saving something for later until you never use it. This is the type of texture that's running through that, which there's two pieces of vinyl that are sewn down, and the weaving, the structure of the weaving actually that generated this textile is actually sewn it like back in. So it has this intensified embossed texture. I like to work in like high stakes and low stakes way digitally and also in the real. I have a relationship with eBay and also tracking puzzles and puzzle design. And I inadvertently bought 3 copies of the same puzzle, not realizing that I had done that. And it inspired me to try to collaborate all 3 into one. I do intend to make this at some point, but this is actually a hypothetical project. Materiality and thinking about how it came to where I am and why it's in the trash. I think a lot about that a lot. I'm really blown away by fashion that falls out of favor. And also thinking about how the earliest versions of these things were made before they made it to us. This is a picture after some research that I did of inlaid mosaic linoleum being made in Scotland, which it's hard to fathom that it would have been pieced together like a puzzle before being fused and then sent into somebody's house. But that's the most original version of this otherwise material that we find that we're often throwing out of our homes. Whoops. I also in the over the course of a sabbatical that I took, I was lucky enough to travel to Scotland to look very closely at this material. I gave myself the job of running to track the research of this and to see how far back can I go to understand like why this material even exists. And I got the chance to meet what I would call like the great great grandfather of the whole thing, which is this piece of mosaic linoleum, which happened to be at that museum. My background in fiber kind of flipped out when I realized that the original version of this had woven jute on the backside. Work that was happening kind of simultaneously at that time was I didn't realize like that it would have such an impact on the tectonic fit factor that I was playing with on my table. Researching how a material comes to be will influence what you're doing with it, and I found that this project, which was sort of coming into focus at the same time, was starting to get informed by like where I was going with what I was talking about. Again, this is all broken material that I additionally broke and then worked back into to create this sort of tectonic rebuilding of pattern. similar idea in a wall hung version. Telegraphing in a flooring context means that that's when the flooring, the supports and the framework of the house actually start to show up through the resilient flooring. And linoleum is a type of material that actually starts to reveal that over time, which is kind of amazing. Telegraphing is an interesting word. I'm also stuck on words that can mean more than one thing. More projects about collage and waking something back up to take what is a static design and to make it feel like it's growing. And then just a few more pictures on nostalgia and accumulation. This is a more recent architectural build that I did at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Arlington. And the piece is called Depth Q, which is a reflection on the fact that, for a long time I've been making work about other people's objects. And this actually kind of brought me face to face with an experience that I had of going into an estate sale of two neighbors of ours that had passed away within 2 months of each other on our street. And, as it goes with estate sales and auction sweeps and things like that, we went in to their home to see, like, how is this going to be sold? And it was sort of a fire sale of objects. And what happened was that the auctioneer would stand in front of entire rooms or a whole closet and point to it and say, how much for everything, sight unseen. And he was turning, by just pointing to it and naming it that way, he was turning these spaces inside of a continuous house into sort of islands of material and space. And I had this very intense reaction to like standing in front of their master bedroom closet, which was filled from the bottom to the top with them. It was unbelievable. And it made me think about the accumulation of material that my husband and I have also picked up along the way, and how nostalgia is not something that's like generationally 40 years ago. It's actually something that can be from last year. If there's anything that like COVID period, I think taught me was that nostalgia for something even like 2 or 3 years ago is as intense as something that can be 40 years or, beyond your own lifetime of object holding. This was the first time I had put a ceiling on one of these pieces and controlled the lighting. And the idea was coming from a place where I wanted this to feel like a second floor that you were on, even though you were in the room with the piece. The sight lines were important to have kind of like a limitation to them again, where you feel like you're kind of in a second life behind what you're looking at. All of these objects were intentionally put exactly where they were. We inadvertently make timelines when we sort of shove things together, and all of those puzzles are named and identified for a certain reason. I happen to be married to, somebody who is 4 days younger than me in the same year. And we have always thought about, the twinning of that, like the remarkable twinning of that circumstance. And when I was making this piece, I realized this was more about our history than anybody else's. And, that can happen with your work, that it changes over time. Um, More work about embedding other people's work. This was made by a family member that was, I also sandwiched inside of vinyl and then froze. So I'm interested in the idea of saving things for sort of past the point of their time. Most recently, I've put up a show at the Philadelphia International Airport, which is up through December of 2025. I have a whole bunch of these pieces that are on display, which is really quite a pleasure. It's kind of amazing. An airport has got more foot traffic than a museum. So, and then we happen to have a really robust curatorial team and agenda with that, where like a lot of the people for the past 30 years that have been showing in this space, like a lot of really strong work has been shown in this context at the airport. The last piece that I'm just going to show here is the most recent one that I've finished, which is a series of headscarves that I've sewn into this vinyl. And then I've also added a wire to the edge of them, so they're sort of permanently stiffened into this drape. I come from a family of people who were enthusiastic hairspray users. So for anybody that remembers the product of Aquanet, this is sort of an ode to that. I was interested in dialing down the sheen of the vinyl to make it really speak the metaphor of chiffon in this setting. But these are exactly hardened and they'll never be able to come out of where they are. So again, like locking something in place so it can't be lost again. And that's my show.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Chrissy.
You are welcome.
Um,
I'll stop the share here.
yeah, so we still have a good crowd here. In a few minutes for questions and answers. Anybody want to unmute and ask questions? I may have one or two, but I'll let
Sure.
other people jump in first. It looks like, yeah, go for it, Alex.
I was just wondering, in your presentation, you talked about all the different ways in which you have sourced materials in the past. I was just wondering if you have like a favorite or preferred way to source your materials that makes them like more sentimental, more meaningful, more metaphorical meaning to your art.
Well, okay, like I think one thing that I really appreciate, especially, is when I have an interaction with somebody in a flea market setting where they and I both recognize that something is valuable. And I really appreciate somebody else's reaction to value. Not because I think it's valuable, but because they think it's valuable. I like paying attention to that and also remembering that the reason why I was directed to that is because somebody else pointed it out. Um, my own objects are important to me, but that's really only something that I know. And I've kind of learned to find it anywhere. Like that's one thing that in my art practice I've learned in time is that like I actually can find my like that essence on kind of anything, like of other people's spaces, of other people's things. Um, the speed at which I found things or was forced to find things at Rare because that is a functioning facility that's a tipping yard where you can't like, stand in the middle of it and have a critique about why you're having a reaction. You just have to act. And I think that also the immediacy of that made me realize that I don't have to explain it before I'm drawn to it. And I think like I found that in a lot of different ways, whether I'm having an interaction with somebody because of it, or if because the situation itself is like limited.
All right, well, I've got a question for you, Chrissy.
Sure.
It kind of has to do with your process also, I think, similar to Alex's question. Thinking about you being an instructor of art, a teacher, as well as a practicing artist, and it's something I'm constantly, thinking about is the balance of, your teacher life and your artist life. And then it seems like collecting and just the process of seeing things and like you said, paying attention to the double take is part of your process. So I guess my question is, how often are you actively going out seeking things versus accidentally seeing things? Have you ever thought about, which is more or which is less, or does that make sense as far as a question goes? Yeah.
Sure, sure. No, well, okay. I'm a commuter, and I think that frames a lot of like the speed at which I notice things. I'm constantly in a place of what I would call situational awareness, which means when I'm getting off the train in Baltimore or I'm on my way anywhere, whether I'm on the Broad Street line in Philadelphia, watching people go by in the middle of their day, that's actually the perfect time to pay attention, is when no one's paying attention. It's a distracted atmosphere. I think that my awareness has me looking at how people are dressed and also how did those textiles get made? Like when I'm on the process of going up an escalator, I'll be looking at the back of someone's clothing and think like, who's the designer that made this? How did this textile get here? I'm thinking about that stuff all of the time. And so I think like the surprise of it just happens to be in passing with people. Like that's when I feel like I'm the most surprised and blown away is when I see somebody else's severe sense of style and like how intensely they enjoy that. Like I make a point of actually saying to strangers all the time, like, you look fabulous. I need to tell you, like I can see it too. Like I know you look fabulous. I'm going to confirm that you look fabulous too. I think it's important to kind of name that and like high five other people for it when you see it. And so as a result, like being around other people is really critical to me, and also knowing people in passing. I mean, I think what's interesting about like teaching is that you find yourself sort of facing a certain direction all the time. The students know you as, in a very specific way under certain circumstances, but like all the facets that we have, like I feel like I'm often paying attention not only to what they're wearing, but what they're talking about, and like, and also having the high five moment with them when they recognize that like they're onto something. So yeah, that was kind of a roundabout answer, but I think, yeah, commuting frames a lot of how I catch things.
Definitely. Other questions from the audience? All right, we'll go ahead and end here. Just one last thing, something I noticed during the Zoom lecture, and it's, I guess less of a question, more of a comment,
Mm.
is well, number one, I love the humor in your talk and in your work and just generally, and it's something that I noticed that in a Zoom lecture with all the screens, blank, that it may be more difficult to read the room. But I was laughing out loud several times, and I just want you to know that it was a wonderful lecture, and I was very engaged, and I would imagine everybody else was. But there's no way to kind of show that in this platform. Versus being, in person and kind of being able to see the audience and their reactions and kind of gauging the flow that way. But it was excellent. So that's my
Thank you.
comment, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you. It's funny. It's nice to hear you say that too, because I see the humor in what I'm doing, but I also recognize that it's packaged in a kind of sad way. And I think complex humor is really fascinating. So I'm often
Certainly.
talking about like the bi-level nature of humor, like things that can be sad and funny at the same time,
Right.
or I don't know. It's like the complexity of that is often something that I'm aiming for in more than one spot. Thanks for picking up on that.
Certainly. All right. Well, again, thank you very much for your I know I invited you, but thank you for taking time out of your day and yeah, I hope you have a good weekend and yeah, I guess that's it.
Thank you all for coming too, and also thanks to the people who I know who are in the room. Sophia, Tim, thanks for being here.
Thanks. Great. All right. Bye, Chrissy.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.